In the 1600s, the residents of the town known as Salem, Massachusetts, used the argument of righteousness and religious beliefs to target one another. This, in turn, began the infamous Salem witch trials, a conflict between the accused, which had no redemption due to the use of spectral evidence, and the accusers. However, by 1993, Sir Governor Phipps abolished spectral evidence as a factor for which a person could be convicted of. This element did not dissolve the witch trials, but it led to an equitable compromise. The people who believed in witches could still conduct trials, but those who weren't convinced of witchcraft could be tried fairly. Though spectral evidence was, and still is, illegitimate as a form of credible evidence, due to the Puritans' strong beliefs and sense of righteousness, it was decided that this type of evidence would be liable during the trials. In Sarah Kruger's The Devil's Spectre, Spectral Evidence and the Salem Witch Trials, she mentions that, one of the 156 imprisoned, 79 were charged solely on the basis of spectral evidence. All the prisoners were initially accused by the group of the afflicted, who claimed the ability to see the invisible role and the specters of the accused tormenting them. Later, she reveals that 100% of the prisoners that were executed were indicated on spectral evidence that had taken place during their examination. Spectral evidence was a prominent part of the Salem witch trials because it allowed someone to claim a witch's specter could torture them, marking an era of unlawfulness. In the examination of Bridget Bishop, an unfortunate victim of the trials that was executed for being a witch, she pleads innocent over and over again. However, the members of the court claim that she came during the night and cursed them, essentially providing nothing more than spectral evidence. The judge pressures Bishop to confess her crimes based solely off of the accounts of the afflicted and refuses to believe she is anything else other than a witch. Without real evidence, it is clear the court is biased, and the only options available to the accused is to either confess to witchcraft, keep denying, be convicted, and either way, eventually be put to death. Puritanistic-driven actions created a rift between rightful convictions and unlawfulness. Frost Knapman, who worked with the National History Press, tells in her article that the first girls who began the witch trials with their accusations widened their accusations to include church members, and Paris preached a sermon indicating that even church members could turn themselves over to the devil, thus making such accusations plausible. Eventually, 150 people were imprisoned and were awaiting trial. An overwhelming worry took over the town, as religion was a main component of the Puritans. Hearing that even members of their pristine church could turn themselves over to the devil to become witches increased overall suspicion. The beginning aided the courts into accepting spectral evidence more easily and reaching a guilty verdict based on more religious righteousness than credible evidence. The accused were tried unfairly due to the acceptance of spectral evidence, and thus they were unrightly incriminated and executed. Many innocents were deemed guilty due to spectral evidence, and thus ruined community and increased paranoia. In a summarization of the effects of the Salem witch trials, a major conflict between innocent and guilty could no longer be distinguished. Every person in Salem had begun to grow suspicious of everyone, including their neighbors, friends, and family. They decided to accuse one another in order to save themselves. They believed that if they deflected attention from themselves, they would be saved. However, this wasn't always the case. Even if you accused someone, it didn't save you from the potential of being accused by someone else. Some admitted to witchcraft just so they wouldn't be hung, which caused this colony to spiral out of control. This use of spectral evidence, in combination with other pieces of evidences, caused major controversy and conflict within the town of Salem. In the publication by Increase Mather, he goes into detail of how exactly the Salem witch trials reached their verdicts based upon testimonies of the afflicted and spectral evidence. The publication shared both the way the trials were held and Mather's thoughts on them. He believed that the convictions were correct, but the way the evidence was presented and accepted was note through his book. Light was shed on how easily the court was swayed with spectral evidence and how anxiety had taken hold over the town. Not only were outsiders of Salem shocked, but the members of the town itself were surprised by how inconclusive the actual spectral evidence was. This sparked many members of the community to debate whether or not they were conducting trials in a fair manner. As people began to question the validity of spectral evidence, witch convictions began to decline because of the boldness of claims and the suspect of evidence rightfulness.
Lastly, in this evaluation of the Court and Orior Terminer article, the accusations were overturned because of the outrageousness. One claim against Governor Phipps's wife was made, and this was seen as a foolish claim, a claim that solidified the invalidity of spectral evidence. As they found this out, the people of Salem quickly realized that they had ruled previous trials incorrectly and, quote, that innocent people had been executed. After realizing this, the people of Salem immensely regretted their actions. Though the trials still occurred throughout Salem, they were able to conduct fair trials once they had abolished the use of spectral evidence. Other uses of evidences were used to prove a person guilty of witchcraft, but the major aspect of conviction was spectral evidence. In this web article, Rebecca Beatrice explores possible evidence that's used to convict supposed witches. This includes confessing guilty, pleading not guilty, refusing to plea, fleeing, and other alternate options. With these pieces of evidence came a tremendous amount of executions. There were now multiple ways to be convicted, and it wasn't always black and white. Puritans believed in predestination, which meant that God had selected who was going to heaven and who was going to hell at the beginning of time. But if they went on a witch hunt to display their favorable qualities, then they believed that they could be saved. However, with spectral evidence being most favorable, many people were found guilty based solely on this incredible piece of evidence. Frost Natman's broad evaluation of the Salem witch trials, they mention the effect on our judicial system, especially in aspects of how it differs to our courts today. This is especially imperative in relation to the dissolve of the trials because it brought attention to the evidence used in the court and whether it was valid. They also mention Increase Mather's book that put down the validity of spectral evidence and the effect. Third, the colony's governor to pardon those convicted after September 17th and the fears of witchcraft died down. In 1703, most of the guilty verdicts were reversed, and in 1710, most of the families were compensated. The courts of Salem, Court Oyer, and Court Terminer were disbanded in 1692 and established the beginning for rightful conviction in court trials. In the Salem Journal, Governor Phipps's strong position for spectral evidence was put into question. This was a substantial part of Salem's ending of the trials because it questioned his intentions and authority. For example, he had appointed a judge who had no background or degree in law and tried to defend himself by accusing his Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton. Consequently, the fraud of this governor made the people of Salem more aware to the potential corruption of their political leaders and helped them stray away from similar destruction. In accordance to information provided in previous articles and this additional source, we can conclude an observation of court systems after the trials and today. For example, we're allowed to choose our lawyers instead of being appointed a biased defender, and there is no religion or racism in the court system. In Salem's witch trials, there were often, but not always, swayed to convict a person with lesser status or not of Puritan religion. Not only that, but it solidified our court system's need for credible and reliable evidence, rather than basing it off of imagination. Salem's mistakes during their witchcraft era has opened the doors for a more fair and rightful court system. The use of spectral evidence during the Salem witch trials was a common practice but heavily biased against the accused. It wasn't until 1693 that the use of the evidence was banned and, while witch trials still commenced, the accused could now be treated to a fair trial and the public could still accuse others of witchcraft and persecute them. Those who had already been put to trial, died, or awaiting trials would be tried in an unjust court. Even after spectral evidence was abolished, the trials clearly displayed how strained and biased a fearful court system can become when accepting spectral evidence. However, once the court system stopped accepting this type of evidence, the town of Salem could still conduct witch trials, and those accused would no longer be subjected to an unfair trial. Through all this trouble, heartache, suspicion, and fear, spectral evidence was no longer valid in court, especially in future trials against supposed witches.